It was a quiet night in late October. I was on patrol, driving down the empty streets of our small Texas town. The air had that heavy, dead feeling that came in the early hours. Not much ever happened in our town after midnight, just the occasional bar fight or wandering animal. But that night, around 2:15 a.m., I too got a call that still haunts me. I picked up the radio and there was a man on the other end. "Officer, please. I think someone's in my house," he said. "Calm down, sir," I replied, gripping the radio tighter. "What do you mean? What exactly do you?" Silence for a few seconds, but I could hear his breathing, rapid and shallow. And just as she was about to say something, the line cut off. It tried calling him back, but it went straight to voicemail. The caller ID showed his address, a place a few streets away near the edge of town. Something in his voice made me uneasy, so I decided to check it out. When I pulled up to the address, I expected to see a house, maybe with a light on, but there was nothing there. There just open fields stretching out into the dark with the faint silhouette of trees in the distance. The only house I could see was farther down the road, a small farmhouse with a single light flickering on the porch. I double-checked the address. It was right, no doubt about it. It should have seen a house there, but there was only empty land, quiet and dark, feeling a strange pull. I decided to walk up to the farmhouse, thinking maybe they knew something. I knocked on the door, and after a few moments a young man answered. He looked tired, confused, and not like he'd made any desperate phone calls. "Can I help you, officer?" asked, squinting at me through the dim light. "Sorry to bother you," I said, trying to sound casual, though my nerves were won. "I got a call from this address, or close to it." The caller sounded like he was in trouble. "But I can't find any other houses around here. Do you know if anyone else lives nearby?" The man frowned and shook his head. But there was nothing there. There just open fields stretching out into the dark with the faint silhouette of trees in the distance. The only house I could see was farther down the road, a small farmhouse with a single light flickering on the porch. I double-checked the address. It was right, no doubt about it. It should have seen a house there, but there was only empty land, quiet and dark, feeling a strange pull. I decided to walk up to the farmhouse, thinking maybe they knew something. I knocked on the door, and after a few moments a young man answered. He looked tired, confused, and not like he'd made any desperate phone calls. "Can I help you, officer?" asked, squinting at me through the dim light. "Sorry to bother you," I said, trying to sound casual, though my nerves were won. "I got a call from this address, or close to it." The caller sounded like he was in trouble. "But I can't find any other houses around here. Do you know if anyone else lives near?" But there was nothing there. There just open fields stretching out into the dark with the faint silhouette of trees in the distance. The only house I could see was farther down the road, a small farmhouse with a single light flickering on the porch. I double-checked the address. It was right, no doubt about it. It should have seen a house there, but there was only empty land, quiet and dark, feeling a strange pull. I decided to walk up to the farmhouse, thinking maybe they knew something. I knocked on the door, and after a few moments a young man answered. He looked tired, confused, and not like he'd made any desperate phone calls. "Can I help you, officer?" asked, squinting at me through the dim light. "Sorry to bother you," I said, trying to sound casual, though my nerves were won. "I got a call from this address, or close to it." The caller sounded like he was in trouble. "But I can't find any other houses around here. Do you know if anyone else lives nearby?" The man frowned and shook his head. But there was nothing there. There just open fields stretching out into the dark with the faint silhouette of trees in the distance. The only house I could see was farther down the road, a small farmhouse with a single light flickering on the porch. I double-checked the address. It was right, no doubt about it. It should have seen a house there, but there was only empty land, quiet and dark, feeling a strange pull. I decided to walk up to the farmhouse, thinking maybe they knew something. I knocked on the door, and after a few moments a young man answered. He looked tired, confused, and not like he'd made any desperate phone calls. "Can I help you, officer?" asked, squinting at me through the dim light. "Sorry to bother you," I said, trying to sound casual, though my nerves were won. "I got a call from this address, or close to it." The caller sounded like he was in trouble. "But I can't find any other houses around here. Do you know if anyone else lives nearby?" The man frowned and shook his head. But there was nothing, feeling cold and hollow. But I know they didn't argue with me, but I could tell from their faces that they didn't believe me, and maybe in some small way I didn't believe it either. It was like trying to hold on to smoke. The harder it tried to recall his face, his features, the more they slipped away in the days that followed. It tried to shake off the experience, to write it off as a trick of the mind, maybe the result of exhaustion or stress, but every time I closed my eyes, I could see that shadowy figure in my backseat, those glinting eyes watching me in the mirror. Noon ever called from that address again. When I looked it up later, there was no record of any house, the renophone number registered to that area, just a patch of empty land that had been abandoned for decades. I've been back to that spot a few times since, unable to let it go, hoping to find some kind of answer. but every time it's the same silent field, the same empty stretch of road before. Weegeet into the next story. If you come for the first time, please make sure to subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon for upcoming scary stories. We need your support. Please share the stories with your friends and family. Thanks. I've been a police officer in San Diego for over 15 years, working specifically as a handler in the K9 unit. In that time, I've seen my share of difficult days. The job is tough and some moments push you to your limits, but one particular day stands out, showing me how terrifying this work can be. It was a little afternoon on March 3rd, 2022, when the Sheriff's Department received an urgent request. They needed immediate backup at a residence nearby. The call sounded serious. A woman at the location had been given multiple eviction notices, and when the deputies attempted to serve her the final paperwork, she acted in a way noon expected. They said, "Come to the door," holding a large knife, her face cold and unyielding. When they tried talking, Toher slammed the door shut, barricading herself inside. Her aggression sent up alarms, and soon officers from our department, including myself and the C9 unit, were dispatched for reinforcement. When we arrived, I could feel the tension thick in the air. The building was an older apartment complex with narrow hallways and walls that seemed to press entrapping sounds and shadows. Like my heart pounded with a familiar tense anticipation. We were told to wait outside the apartment lobby with the canines ready to enter. If things escalated, I gripped the leash, tightly feeling my dog's muscles tense, sensing the tension as I did. A few minutes later, we were called in as a less lethal option, just in case the situation needed de-escalating. By the time we entered the unit, the deputies had already broken down the door, splintering it inwards. I stepped in cautiously, my eyes scanning the dim apartment. The air was stale and heavy, and there was a faint smell of something burned or metallic. As we moved down a narrow hallway toward a partially open door, I could see her standing there in the shadows, her gaze fixed on us with a chilling intensity. The other officers, led by a deputy named Jason, were shouting commands for her to come out with her hands up. She didn't respond, didn't flinch, as if she were immune to fear or reason. Jason, frustrated, fired warning shots into the wall beside her, hoping to jolt her into surrender, but she just stood there, resolute, unmoved, like some grim statue. Then in an instant she lunged. On second she was standing in the doorway, and the next she was charging at us with the knife raised. I instinctively backed up, stumbling slightly as we moved into the cramped hallway, trying to put distance between ourselves and that deadly blade Jason fired. But his shots missed in the frantic narrow space. The woman's eyes burned with a wild, determined fury as she closed the gap. I barely registered what happened next. All I remember is a sharp, searing pain in my chest. As the knife connected, she had struck me for a few heart-stopping seconds. The pain exploded through me, intense and white-hot. She pulled back, and before I could process the pain, another officer opened fire. This time, the bullet hit their mark. The woman fell to the ground, her knife slipping from her grasp. He collapsed lifelessly in the narrow hallway. The silence that followed was thick and haunting, broken only by my shaky breathing. I couldn't move. My chest throbbed in agony, and it felt like fire was spreading. From the wound, it read to call out, tried to tell anyone that I'd been stabbed, but my voice barely registered. The officers were busy securing the scene, and for a moment, it was as if I were invisible, lost in a haze of paint. And a few seconds later, one of them noticed, "Is anyone hurt?" They called out, "I've been stabbed." It managed, my voice weak but desperate. Their response was immediate. They got me out. Off their fast, helping me down the stairs and into an ambulance. The ride to the hospital was a blur of sirens and the distant voices of paramedics. I lay there staring up at the ceiling, feeling the weight of everything that had just happened. I knew I was going to survive. I could tell the wound wasn't fatal, but the pain was something I'd never experienced before, a reminder of just how close I'd come to not making it out at the hospital. The doctors worked quickly, treating the stab wound and stabilizing meth. They told me I was lucky that the knife had missed anything vital. It was surreal hearing those words, knowing how close I'd been to every different outcome. Not long after I was released, patched up, but forever marked by that day and the days that followed. I learned more about the woman who had attacked us. Her name was Yan Lee, 47 years old. She'd been dealing with eviction notices for some time, refusing to leave, despite repeated warnings. The day before, she had even threatened a maintenance worker with a knife. Her resistance had escalated to the point where it became a lethal confrontation. I was on patrol in San Francisco. The off night shift most officers dread, quiet, cold, and creeping. The fog had rolled in thick, turning every street and corner into something strange and hidden. The city looked like a forgotten memory, with streetlights casting dim pools of yellow that barely touched the darkness around them. The radio crackled with nothing important, the usual uneventful updates around 2 a.m. I was making my round on a lonely stretch of residential street when I noticed a house on the corner set back from the road. It looked like it hadn't been touched in years. The windows were dark, some broken with peeling paint that made the whole place look like it was slowly crumbling from my car. I could just make out something in the upstairs window, a shadow, a figure. It was hard to tell through the MC. I got out of the car, curiosity, pulling the closer eyes locked on that upstairs window. I couldn't make out any details, but the figure seemed motionless like a statue trapped behind dirty glass. I squinted trying to get a clearer look, but it was still quiet. Just as I was about to turn back to the car, a scream shattered the silence. It came from the house, echoing down the street and making the air feel even colder. It wasn't an animal or a stray noise, it was a scream human. And raw, my first thought was trouble. Maybe some criminal was hiding out. Maybe someone was hurt. I knew it was risky, but I couldn't ignore it. I reached for my flashlight and radio, adding that I was investigating a disturbance. Then I headed up the cracked walkway to the front door. The house loomed over each window like an empty eye staring, and watching the front door creaked open easily as if it had been left that way. The smell hit me first, old wood mildew, and a hint of something metallic like rust or maybe old blood. The house wassail and tassifit, waiting for me to make the first move. My flashlight cut through the darkness, illuminating broken furniture, torn wallpaper, and a thick layer of dust that covered everything. It was clear noon had lived here in years, yet someone or something was here tonight. I moved cautiously, every step echoing through the empty rooms. Each floorboard groaned under my weight, sounding like faint whispers in the quiet. I kept my focus on the stairs leading up to the second floor, where I'd seen the shadow. Something told me that whatever I was looking for was up there. The stairs were steep and narrow, barely sturdy enough to hold me. As I reached the top, the air grew colder, thicker, and heavier. My flashlight caught sight of the door to the room, with the windows lightly ajar. I hesitated, listening. Silence. With one steady push, I opened the door. My flashlight beam fell upon a woman sitting by the window, tied to a chair with thick ropes binding her wrists and ankles. Her clothes were torn, her face pale, and her eyes wide with fear. A piece of cloth was tied tightly around her mouth, muffling any sounds. She tried to make her gaze locked onto him, desperate and pleading. I approached, her heart pounding. As I carefully removed the cloth from her mouth, she gasped, head for air, her voice shaky and low. He took mesh, she whispered. I ignored him. In college, and he wouldn't let it go. The story tumbled out in fragments. She told me that she'd known the man from her college days. She'd been persistent, always trying to gather attention, and she'd brushed him off thinking he'd move on. But it hadn't. Years later, he'd found her, followed her, and watched her until he knew her routine. One night, they grabbed her off the street and brought her to this place where noon would find them. He wanted her to see him, to acknowledge him. I didn't need any more convincing. I called for backup, relaying her story as best as I could. The woman's fear was like a tangible thing in the room, heavy and suffocating. She kept glancing at the door, as if expecting him to burst in any second. I assured her that help was on the way, but I knew the feeling of being watched, of something lurking just out of sight. Backup arrived, filling the house with the sound of footsteps and voices. They took her out, guiding her down the narrow staircase and into the night, where she was finally free. Her relief was palpable, yet her fear hadn't left. She kept looking over her shoulder, as if he might appear out of nowhere. Not long after we found him, he'd been hiding in the basement, listening, waiting. He didn't fight when we cuffed him, his eyes vacant, yet filled with something dark, something twisted. As they let him out, looked at me, small chilling smile curling his lips, as if he'd won something in his twisted mind. With him in custody and the woman safe, I was left alone in the house to finish the last checks. The quiet had returned, the kind of quiet that seemed to cling to the walls. I couldn't shake the feeling that the house was still watching, that it had absorbed the fear and hat red that had unfolded here over the years. I wondered how many stories like this it held, how many secrets had sunk into its walls, waiting for someone like cover them. The house stood empty again, but I couldn't shake the thought that it was only a matter of time before it claimed another story, another secret hidden in its shadows. As I left, the fog had thickened, swallowing up the house, and it was as if it had never been there at all.